The minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009 when it was lifted from $6.55 an hour to its current amount, $7.25 an hour. For the average full-time worker, $7.25 an hour translates into about 15 grand a year, barely enough to survive on. That's why President Obama has thrown his support behind a congressional proposal to raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. But some people want to go even further. Today, fast food workers in hundreds of cities across the country walked off their jobs to demand a living wage of $15 an hour. Theirs was the second big labor action by low-wage workers in just the past week, a welcome sign for those who thought the labor movement was dead. Today's strike has economic inequality in the news once again, and that's a good thing. But hardly anyone is talking about the bigger issues at play. Running a business is a privilege, not a right. And when companies like McDonald's refuse to pay their workers a living wage and instead rely on you and me, taxpayers, to help their employees survive, they're abusing that privilege. If we really wanted to make sure that American workers earned enough to get by without relying on public assistance, then we do one very simple thing. Give every corporation that refuses to pay its workers a living wage the corporate death penalty. For more on this, I'm joined from our New York studios by Adam Thompson, attorney and host of the Adam Thompson Show. Adam, welcome back.
Nice to be back, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. So, corporations, when you incorporate, if you're McDonald's, you've got all these protections. You've got, look at BP down in the Gulf. 11 men died, and nobody even went to jail. If you or I killed somebody as a person, we'd be in prison. Corporations get all kinds of rights and privileges. Shouldn't they at least, in exchange for those rights and privileges, at least pay their workers enough that you and I as taxpayers don't have to subsidize them?
Hey, listen, I'm all for everybody getting a fair wage. Look, I grew up in a single-parent household. My mom worked for the telephone company as an operator. I know what it's like to struggle and not know if you got money for the rent, okay? So using that as a starting point, everyone should get a fair wage. But do corporations have to guarantee that? I don't really think that's what this is about. What this really should be about is corporations are going to make the most profits they can because that's how the system works.
That's wrong.
And they're going to try to do that
wait a minute,
by
that's
paying
wrong.
the most minimal they can to their workers.
That's turning the American tradition on its head. The reason we allow corporations to incorporate...
We're in a capitalist society.
We are not a capitalist society. We are a democratic republic. There are co-ops in our society. There are worker-owned cooperatives. There are nonprofits in our society. We're not a capitalist society.
Sure.
We have capitalism that exists within our society.
Different forms of company.
But we are not a capitalist nation. We are
as much money as you can.
We are a democratic republic. And yes, there are capitalists who want to try and make as much money as they can. And the whole purpose of having regulated capitalism is to restrain those impulses of greed that can be so destructive. And so shouldn't we say...
Everyone should be against greed, but you want the answer. I love coming on your show, Tom, because I think I always put it in a nutshell and a bottom line for you and your listeners. You know what the problem is here, and you started the segment off about it, is we need a high minimum wage. You do that, and then corporations, regardless of who they are going to have to pay a minimum rate to employees to make sure that they have an appropriate wage to live in our country. Period. It's done. There's your answer. And corporations who can't follow that will get the death penalty because they'll shut down. But corporations, as it is now, are following the law. They're doing what they're allowed to do.
So did I just hear you agree with me and call for a higher minimum wage?
Of course there should be a high minimum wage. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Workers should be paid a fair wage to live on. But you can't yell and blame corporations now because they're following the law.
I'm blaming Republicans. I'm blaming Republicans who have been fighting an increase in the minimum wage.
You put me in this pigeonhole. I'm not Republican, Democratic, liberal, libertarian, nothing. I call it like I see it, Tom. Make the wages higher and make the corporations pay that rate.
Okay, so just curious, Adam, what do you think would be, what would be an appropriate minimum wage?
Well, what's interesting is it's very hard to answer that question for one reason, because I think the big elephant in the room that's bigger, which should be really the focus of this topic, is runaway inflation. You know, the dollar keeps losing value around the world. You know, what you could buy today, you know, you're not going to be able to buy maybe in a week for the same price.
The dollar's actually stronger around the world now than it was, you know, a decade and a half ago. It's one of our big problems. It's why we're importing so much rather than exporting. If the dollar was worthless, we'd be exporting. Our products would be cheap.
We're probably on the verge of the dollar collapsing, Tom. That's the real bottom line. We're not that far.
I think we're on the verge of the stock market collapsing.
But
I think the dollar is going to get even stronger. That's going to be a problem for us. That's called deflation. That's a depression.
I think the dollar's worthless. It's a piece of paper that's not backed by any real substance or asset. It's paper that a Federal Reserve is printing that no one has control over. That could be a whole nother show that you do, Tom. That's the reality. Federal Reserve is printing money and controls everything, probably worldwide. But the bottom line is inflation's out of control, and until we get less spending and control how inflation goes up,
we're on the edge of deflation.
Listen,
and inflation is not caused by wages going up. Wages going up, it can be a symptom of inflation, but inflation is always caused by shortages. The last inflation that we had in the 70s was caused by an oil shortage.
The point I'm trying to make is if we raise the minimum wage, let's even say we do $10 or $11, you still have the issue that after that's done, if prices keep going up on everything that you need to live, if milk goes from $3 to $3.50, then to $4, you're not getting the same value. We're going to have the same argument again that we need to raise the wages again because it's not meeting the standard of living.
But wages are typically not 100% of the cost of the product. You know, wages are like 5% of the cost of a product or 7% of the cost of a product. So if wages go up 5%, and so the cost of the product went from 7% to 7.5%. And the prices are going to go up 0.5%, maybe. And that's assuming that we stop going from CEOs making 500 times what workers make and don't go back to 30 times what.